it into an anthology.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out.
Okay, so let's see how long it takes us till we go live. It might tell you that it's live.
It says it's streaming live right now.
Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna trust it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Fingers
so yeah,
crossed.
thank you for joining us for the first pop culture panel series of 2021. The topic of this panel is romance in graphic novels and comics. This event is in partnership with Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore, where you can purchase books by our guest authors. I just want to take a moment to thank Mysterious Galaxy for collaborating with us, and a shout out to their special events coordinator, Haiti Smith, for doing everything that she did. It was fabulous. So thank you to Haiti, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for being here today. With us today, I don't know if it's how you show up on the boxes, but it's just how I have you ordered alphabetically. So Steve, Ammidown, and we have determined that he is down for this panel. I couldn't help it. Johnnie Christmas, Sydney Heifler, and Sarah Kuhn, thank you so much for being here and for answering all the questions that we're gonna get. So before I get into that, do you wanna just tell us a little bit about yourselves? And I guess, I don't know who to start with. How about Steve?
Sure, I guess. Yeah, my name is Steve Ammidown. I am currently unemployed, but previously was the manuscripts and outreach archivist for Bowling Green State University's Brown Popular Culture Library, where I became sort of a subject specialist in romance novels, but I also have a couple of years of experience cataloging comic books at my undergrad at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Go Retrievers. So yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at right now. I'm just started a blog called Romance Fiction Has a History. I'm sort of taking some of the work that I did at Bowling Green and writing it into blog form because it's 2009 somewhere. And you know, sort of condensing some of the tweet threads I did in the past and things, and talking a little bit about research in the field and some resources around it and what other people are doing as well. So yeah, and it is snowing here, and I would much rather be in sunny Escondido right now.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you're here and that you're joining us. I guess I'll just go down the list. Okay, Johnnie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a
oh no, I can't. Okay. For a moment, you cut out, but you're good. You're good.
It's like very ghostly. I'm an author of a haunted romance called Crema. That's available on Comixology, and if you have an Amazon account, it's you can see it for free as well. Yeah, I've been a graphic novelist for 7 years now. I've some of the works I've previously worked on is the Image Comics series Sheltered. I worked with collaborated with Margaret Atwood on the Angel Catbird series. Adapted William Gibson's lost script for Alien 3 into a graphic novel. Currently writing the sci-fi series Tartarus over at Image Comics. And like I said, Crema, a haunted romance that stars, you know, a barista who if she drinks too much caffeine, she starts to see ghosts, and the heiress of a coffee farm in Brazil. And they come together, fall in love, and then things get spooky from there. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited that you said yes, because I loved reading. I was like, if there's coffee involved and romance, it's like and there's like a ghost, like it's great. It's great. Okay, next on my list is Sydney. Sydney, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a comic book historian. I'm currently at The Ohio State University, where I'm a first-year PhD student in the history program. I started researching romance comics, like the ones created by Simon and Kirby in 1947, about 8 years ago. I was actually really surprised. I just got one of those Facebook memory things that pop up and make you kind of hate yourself. But so like I saw that I've been doing for 8 years, and And I started at community college, and I took that to UC Davis for my undergrad and did my honors thesis on it. Went to Oxford because I really wanted to study some British romance comics I had found. So I was like, I'm just going to go do a master's to read romance comics. And now I'm at Ohio State, and hopefully my dissertation will incorporate romance comics again from both of the nations. And yeah, and I'm obsessed. So that's me.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy that you are here with us. And finally, Sarah, welcome back to one of our programs.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be part of this. I'm a writer. I write prose novels and graphic novels. Most of them, well, all of them either are romance or have something to do with romance. So I'm probably best known for a series called Heroine Complex, which is a series of prose novels. And those are about Asian American superheroines. They're kind of contemporary fantasy / paranormal romance. And one of the things the first book is probably best known for is having demonic cupcakes. That seems to be one of the selling points besides the romance. And then I also write in the prose space YA romantic comedies. My first one was called I Love You So Mochi, and there were no demonic cupcakes in that one, but there were non-sentient, non-supernatural desserts of other kinds. And I have another rom-com, YA rom-com coming out this year called From Little Tokyo with Love. This is what it looks like. And that one also has dessert in it. And again, not dessert that they have to fight, just regular dessert. And then in the comic space, I was part of a romance comics anthology called Fresh Romance, which came out a few years ago. And I also wrote the graphic novel Shadow of the Batgirl with the artist Nicole Gu. And that was not a romance, but it did feature a love interest who starts a romance novel book club at his library. So everything has a little romance or a lot of romance in it. And that is something that I always enjoy.
Yay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for spending time with me, for introducing yourselves. I want to let the viewers know that I am watching the comments. So if you have any questions at all at any time, please feel free to ask those and I will plug them in where they make sense in the conversation. And I lost my script. Okay, I found it again. Oh, and another note to our viewers. If you need closed captions or a transcript, once this is uploaded to YouTube, those will be available. So after the live stream is over, I will upload this chat to YouTube so everyone can enjoy it. So before we get to the questions, it is 2020 is over. 2020 has begun, and we are currently living in it. So how's the year been treating you? I mean, Johnnie, I have to know, is that a real background? Because I want to be there.
It looks nice.
And everything. Yeah, this is what Canada looks like.
So Steve, you said it's snowing.
It is. Yeah, we got a foot of snow. Sydney knows this. We got a foot of snow on Tuesday and a couple more inches today, and it's still snowing. And yeah, we've had all of our snow for the winter in the last month, which has been a bit much.
Been a lot. I went outside to just like walk to the grocery store, which is just across the street, and I was like, never mind, I can't, I'll die. And I came right back inside. And I'm from California, so this is a whole new world.
Yeah.
Well, I think the weather everywhere right now is either it's like really cold or it's really hot. We're in the extremes. Okay, so the first question is just kind of like why you got into romance, and some of you kind of brushed on that in your introductions. So let's start with Johnnie and Sarah. So what drew you to telling these stories? I don't know who wants to go first.
You can go ahead. I know it's always weird because it's like no one wants to talk and then everybody talks first, but I think the person with the most beautiful background should go first.
So I've always wanted to do a romance comic, and where my career has been for the most part has been in the direct market side of comics, and there just hasn't been a lot of romance in that side of the marketplace. It's usually fight central and, you know, superheroes, etc. So I've had this itch, you know, to do a romance comic, and just always wanted to. And luckily, Comixology came on the scene, and they were and I pitched them this romance comic, just thinking it wouldn't go anywhere because still kind of in the direct market mindset, and they went for it. So I was, you know, over the moon. I always loved that. I love like the Kirby romance comics. I just love like this whole you know, depth, deep bench of all these wonderful comics and this whole genre that we don't have as much in North American comics. You know, there's still like Archie and that sort of thing, but so that's kind of my genesis. I've just always wanted to do it, yeah, I don't know like where like deeper than that it came from, but I just thought those comics, the Kirby particularly, were just so beautiful. Like the line work so beautiful, and so there's like even in the ink line, there's like a romantic quality to the way the figures come on the page. And I didn't draw Crema. That was a beautiful work of Dante, our artist on there. And but even my line work when I'm on my other stuff that I'm drawing has sort of that same kind of old school quality. You'll see it even in like Angel Capert and others. So I think I've always kind of had an affinity, like my work would fit there, not just in the word, but also in the lines.
Yeah, and I would say for me, like the sort of DNA of my fandom, I guess, like the things that I really loved and responded to growing up was kind of an equal mix between nerdy superhero, Star Wars, like big, sci-fi fantasy genre things. And then rom-coms, I love rom-coms. Like I always watch this with my mom and stuff. And, as far as like kind of the other stories, I was always a huge shipper. The things I cared most about in the classic Superman movies were Lois and Clark, like that, the relationship between Lois and Clark, or in Star Wars, the first kiss between Han Solo and Princess Leia. That was something I imprinted on very deeply and rewound the videotape like many times until it almost wore out. So those were kind of just the things I responded to growing up. And then when I started writing my own stories, they were just sort of naturally in that space. Heroine Complex was sort of me writing a story that was like the stories I grew up with. There, were lots of like wacky superpowers and fire shooting out of people's hands and hijinks and adventure. But there was I also wanted to have this very deep, romance thread. And so they kind of became a combination of the two. And, I wanted to do that, but with women who looked like me at the center, which was something I did not see very much growing up. So making all of my heroines, Asian American, I've written, I think, almost all Asian American heroines in both sides of my career, is something that I think is, for me, very empowering. I think the beauty of a lot of romance, when you can see yourself in it, is just being able to see yourself being unconditionally loved, which for some people is perhaps does not seem that revolutionary, but to me certainly was. And as far as how I got then into romance comics, after, I had already been really involved with kind of the nerdy girl community. And I had a friend who was the comics editor, Janelle Aslin. And sometime right around when I had my first prose book deal for Heroine Complex, but the book hadn't come out yet, because as we all know, publishing takes 18 million years to get anything done. She wanted to start a romance comics anthology that was very much inspired by a lot of the classic romance comics that have already been discussed a little bit, but that sort of took a modern, take on them, like that took a modern take on them. It's a great sentence, but that sort of like centered people who had perhaps not been centered before, that sort of had a more modern feeling, that used, had like diverse modern creators taking these stories on. So I ended up writing a story for her for that anthology about well, she wasn't really a girl. She was like an alien who comes to our planet and is forced to work as a barista. And she's sort of, her sort of job is Cupid. Like she has to make all these perfect matches of different people. And I just thought it would be funny if someone like had that as their job, and that they kind of didn't like it. Like she sort of sees it as like this like boring corporate, like she just has to do this to, get things over with and like go back to her home planet. And she ends up, of course, having an issue with one of the matches she's supposed to make because she likes one of the people involved, and has to learn about, feelings and emotions and all of those things that actual humans aren't very good at either. But that was just like a premise that I thought was really fun, because certainly to me, even though I write a lot of romance in my real life, sometimes that has been very mysterious to me, but I think is mysterious to a lot of humans. So I just kind of wanted to write something about that. And everything kind of went from there. I'm still really grateful to Janelle, who I think asked me for a pitch solely based on the fact that we had a very passionate discussion about romance novels. And so she remembered that when she was going back to look at who she wanted to pitch for this comic. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I like this little pattern now of like romance and baristas going on. Like, I feel like I should have like done another panel where it's like romance and coffee.
We all want the coffee shop AU. That's what we're all going for.
Right, I'm gonna have to think of some puns, because I was gonna go with like dark roast or blonde roast, so I'm like, no, let's not go that way. Okay, so Steve, you're next, and I have a question for you. So how did you get involved in romance archives and history, and what inspired you to focus on romance?
So I've always been a pop culture nerd and a genre reader. And as I said, earlier, my first library job, when I went back to college in my 30s, my first library job was working with this amazing comic book collection. So I started to see the connections between these sort of ephemeral pop culture items and research, and really understanding the connections between, how we think about comics and how we think about society and all of these things. And so when I got to Bowling Green, one of the first things I saw when I walked in the door, literally outside of my office space, was 10,000 category romances on all these shelves. I was like, there's something here. And they had accumulated over the years all of these manuscript collections from authors, as well as the books and the Romantic Times magazine and all these promotional items. And so I kind of dove in. My wife had been a romance reader for years, and I kind of went to her and I was like, what should I read? And she handed me Courtney Milan and said, go. And that was it. And I got hooked as a fan, not just as an archivist. And so as I sort of built those two roles, I started to notice that there wasn't a lot of the history of romance novels recorded. It was here in these little dribs and drabs and these little articles in Romantic Times, where like 10 copies might exist in libraries across the country. So I started to sort of pull on those threads and started to pull them together. I started using our institutional Twitter account as one of the avenues of sharing those things. And it started to get noticed, and I started building these relationships with authors and researchers and all of these things. I was fortunate enough to be the 2019 Kathy Lynn's Librarian of the Year for the Romance Writers of America, which meant a lot because Kathy Lynn's was the person who had first approached Bowling Green years ago with the idea of creating a romance archive. So it was like this big full circle moment. So yeah, so I started to see an unwritten history, and I'm an archivist. I can't let an unwritten history sit there. It's got to be shared. You know, we have to tell that story. So that's kind of how I got into it. You know, I'm still reading romance, and you know, I have 3 books on my iPad right now, and you know, still trying to find these little stories and share them with people. So.
Thank you. I'm really excited to talk later more about some things that you told me that you found. I'm going to ask about that later because I'm really excited. And Sydney, so I have the question already that I was instructed to ask, so I'm ready to ask it. So how did you come across romance comics, and why do you think they are an important area of study, both from a comic standpoint and an academic standpoint?
Okay. Well, first of all, like, I just want to give a bit of background about how I got into romance comics, which was like by complete accident. So I was at community college and I had to do an honors paper, and my professor was like, look into political cartoons. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to analyze political cartoons. I will die. And I was just very intimidated. So I was like, you know what? I think I can trick him. I'll do something on comics. And the only really experience I'd had with comics was I was super into Archie comics when I was like 4 to 6 years old, but I was banned from reading them because I went up to him. I was like, I'm a twin, by the way. So I went up to my mom. I was like, obviously I'm Betty and Meredith's Veronica because she's not as good as I am. And so my mom was like, no more comics. You're not allowed to read comics. So I was banned. So that was my familiarity with comics when I went to do this project. And I Googled it and a bunch of war comics came up and I was like, that doesn't seem like fun. And then I came across like a romance comic popped up from Comic Book Plus. And I actually thought that they were a joke. Like they seemed kind of like Archie, but more extreme. And I was like, these have to be a joke. They're making fun of people like my grandmother. Like, this is mean. But then I found out they were real. They were invented by Simon and Kirby, who I did not know who these people were, but I like realized that they've invented Captain America. So I was like, okay, well that seems legit. And so and then I found out they were really like they sold super well. So I was like, why is no one talking about these comics? And I had familiarity. I felt comfortable with it because I had familiarity with romance because I'm originally from Mississippi, where there's like a big romance novel reading community. And so I would go back and visit my grandmother, and it's just romance comics all over the house. And not comics, romance novels. So I was like, I know the tropes. So I went to my honors mentor, and he got super excited because he's a huge Jack Kirby fan. And so that's how it all happened. And I think that I became really invested in it and thought it was super important. One, because romance isn't always taken seriously in the academic field. And it really is important because it's played a huge role in history, this concept of romance. And also the comic book isn't always very accepted in the academic field, though that is changing. But at the same time, it could still be very isolated in comic studies or in the English department. So that's one reason why I decided to do a PhD specifically in history. I wanted to bring comics into another discipline. And then also I had like really stupid comments that kept me going. I remember when I was an undergrad, I had these 2 guys when we were waiting for office hours who were like, well, why don't you go to the women's studies department if you care so much about things to do with women? And I was like, well, I'm not going to now. And so I've just been like, I've kind of stuck with it a little bit out of being stubborn, but also thinking it's important to have these conversations. And I want to keep bringing them up.
Thank you. I'm so excited hearing you all talk about how you came into just like romance and comics and graphic novels, because in terms of romance, I started reading them very young, like historical romance, and I started reading manga, but I didn't know that graphic novels could include those stories, because all the ones I would see advertised and marketed were like superheroes, and they're a bunch of white guys in tights. Like that's all that I saw. So that's just all that I thought it was. So I love hearing your histories and how you just got into it. And that kind of works well into our next question. You kind of all mentioned a little bit about like the perception of romance and graphic novels and comics. Romance itself, there's something for everyone, and graphic novels and comics like romance, there's been a long history of being like misunderstood and underestimated because it's not serious. Oh, you're just playing around. Oh, it's not like serious literature. And hopefully this is changing a little bit. Do you think that perception has changed based on like your experiences creating or your experiences like, I'm going to say absorbing, because you can't absorb things, but like reading? I should have prepared that better.
Was that a question for all of us, or I lost track? Who was that a question for?
I think it's for all of you. Do you think that the perception of like romance and or graphic novels has changed for it to be taken more seriously and more widely accepted, or do you think that we're still getting there?
I mean, I'll jump on it a little bit.
Thank you, Steve.
You know, I think there has been a growing, at least from an academic perspective, a growing respect for both comics and romance. You know, genre fiction's always struggled a bit, but at least, you know, things like science fiction and mystery kind of always found, you know, as Sydney said, sort of the home in the English department, right? Like that was where, and that's where popular culture studies started as well. So I think the opinions in academia have improved. I think libraries still struggle with both of these. You know, especially graphic novels, there's always that perception that graphic novels aren't real reading, or they're not appropriate for kids who are learning how to read. But I think, you know, it's changing, but there's always a long way to go. It seems like the hill just keeps getting bigger sometimes.
I can kind of build off a little bit of what Steve said. Just that, yeah, I think it is becoming more accepted in academic circles. I will say that even though I told those guys I wasn't going to go into women's studies, I did, for my master's, I did do women's studies, and I can say that romance as a topic was very much accepted, more so than comics at the time. And there's also Jessica Radway's book that, you know, people love reading the romance. And I will say in the comic book community, I never get judged for what I research. It's all, everyone always gets super excited when I tell them I research romance comics, and it's mostly like men over the age of 40 that are excited about my research. So I think it's pretty widely accepted. It's just that, you know, men aren't necessarily starting the conversation around it, but I think it's very, I would say I've had very positive reception on researching romance comics.
In terms of comics and acceptance there, it feels like yes, there is more acceptance of comics in general, but it feels almost like there isn't like a new acceptance amongst the voice that was heard predominantly. Like that voice is still kind of chirping the same stuff it's been chirping about superheroes, etc. It feels like the change is that there are more voices coming in, and those voices are you know, much more open to all sorts of different sort of stories. They're not coming from the fishbowl in the same ecosystem of, you know, what comics have, the perception of what comics are, what they're supposed to be. So you've got new readers coming in, you've got people from all walks of life, of different backgrounds, and they're not sure they want to hear about the second time Captain America's come out. They want to hear about Captain America, some of them, but also they also want to hear about, you know, comics about, you know, any topic under the sun, you know. So it's a very exciting time in comics. It's just all these and a lot of the young readers who grew up on manga or just like on just like, you know, web comics, you know, are already kind of acclimated to comics about different subject matter and a whole like smorgasbord of topics. So it's super exciting as a person who loves comics, because now there's all this new stuff for me to check out, and as a creator of comics, because now there are all these new stories that I could tell. Where I would like in high school, I had like kind of like this rainy day list of comics that I would like to create one day, but I'd never get a chance to create them. You know, like there just wouldn't be a market for it. But now it's almost like I'm trying to find old sketchbooks and stuff with like notes and like, because you know, like what were some of those really great old ideas that I thought would never happen, but now would be now's a wonderful time, because all these, so long as it's good and so long as it connects with people, I think you've got a fair shot of it getting the opportunity to connect with a lot of people.
Yeah, I will kind of build on that just by saying that as terrible as the internet can be, I feel like it has been somewhat instrumental in giving more people a voice. I think that, you know, certainly back when I was a kid, I think there was kind of an accepted wisdom about, you know, what is comics, what is romance, who enjoys these things, you know, et cetera. And now I feel like, you know, even just on something like Twitter, which again can be terrible, I feel that, you know, I'm kind of part of a lot of different Twitters, like Asian Twitter and comics Twitter and Romancelandia Twitter and, you know, all these different Twitters. And I feel like when someone kind of does try to bring the disrespect into any of those communities, they're shut down pretty quickly.
Yes.
And it feels like because more of us have a voice in that and are kind of able to come together, and it's not just, you know, me as one person yelling at someone in person, it has a little bit more power. And then, you know, as far as the other side, like I was kind of thinking about this question of like, are perceptions changing? Are these things more accepted in certain circles? Are they more respected, et cetera? And I actually think my probably unhelpful answer to that is that I don't care. As a creator, I sort of don't care, because it's sort of weird that there's like, you know, like I remember with Heroine Complex, with my first book, it did get some reviews, mostly from white men, that said things like, well, this is a lot of fun, but it's not earth shattering. And, you know, I think that kind of goes back to a lot of what we sort of talk about when we talk about these things, which is, why are things like fun and love and people experiencing joy, especially people of color and, you know, like people from different marginalized groups, like, why is that not seen as important? But for whatever reason, it's usually not seen as that important, or it's not seen as important as when we write about our struggles and the horrible things that have happened to us. And obviously those are still part of stories, those are still part of experiences. But when I started getting like a couple reviews like that from people who get to see themselves in all kinds of media all the time, I was like, well, I don't really think that that's for you to say, because if I had had this book when I was a child, it would have been earth shattering. It would have rocked my entire world. It might have gotten me to believe that I could be an author sooner. It might have gotten me to believe that I could write women like me as main characters sooner, because it took me a while to get there. So that was kind of the start of where I was like, do I really care about this? Because I don't think this person's experience exactly lines up with mine. And now I think I just got into such a place where, you know, it's February, like it's Valentine's Day. Traditionally, this is when Romancelandia steals itself, because everybody's going to write a terrible story, a terrible article, a terrible think piece about romance. And it's always going to be about books that are like at least 20 years old and still have Fabio on the cover. And it's just so weird. Like, you know, with the popularity of something like Bridgerton, you know, there was like an article where it was like, 2 skeptics read a romance novel and, you know, read the first Bridgerton book and give their opinions on it. And I was like, I literally do not care about this at all, because you know what, that's great that you're deigning to sort of what you consider lower yourself to read something that you don't think is literary. Romance doesn't need you. It is the best-selling genre. It holds up the rest of the literary world. It makes so much money. Like, I was like, these books, they don't need readers who are disdainful of the entire genre. And, you know, I think like with what I have sold and what I have done and the fans in the audience that I have at this point, I'm kind of like, if you're gonna kind of come at me and be like, well, I wouldn't normally read a romance novel, or I wouldn't normally read a comic book or something like that, I'm like, well, good, because I don't care. I actually don't need you. I have plenty of other readers, and so do most creators in this space. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm at with that. Like we were saying, I do think like things are changing, and that is of course good, and all of these things deserve to be very respected. For me as a creator, I'm like, you can respect me or not, but I kind of don't care.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that, you know, these two, you know, romance and comics are going to keep chugging along whether the mainstream cares or not. You know, yeah, like you said, there's nothing that's going to stop romance as a genre ever. It's just going to keep going whether the New York Times writes a terrible article or not.
And I will say that reminds me, like, I keep getting this kind of questions like, okay, when are you gonna research some superhero comics, which I have, but I'm also like, why do I have, like, it's like seen as a sort of like moving up from romance to superheroes, and I'm like, I'm completely fine in romance. It's a significant genre, and also like it's not significant anymore. Like as you said, romance novels are some of the best-selling novels, and so and these comics connect to that. So it's part of an important history. So I feel that I'm still a little bit more frustrated, but mainly because I have to answer to, you know, professors who care. Like I have to defend what I'm researching, but I don't really have as many problems as I used to with that. But just it's kind of frustrating, the whole idea that there's something better than romance that you must upgrade to eventually.
Oh yeah, I mean, I like one thing that has certainly been said to my face is, when are you going to write a real book? And I'm like, well, I've actually written many real books. You can buy them many places. They have covers and binding, and as far as I know, words inside, everything you need to be a real book. But thank you.
Like Mysterious Galaxy, where you can purchase books by Sarah and Johnnie.
Well, and I think just to go back to the superhero thing, like superhero comics have always had romance as a part of them.
Sorry, yes, they do.
And sometimes it's subtext, right? Like
sometimes it's really, really loud.
Like Cap and Bucky. I mean, like that has always existed. Like there's always been, sometimes it's text, sometimes it's subtext, but it's always been there.
Can we talk about like Ant-Man and Wasp? Like basically a romance comic. Like there's tons of romance in comics, and some of it like directly just revolves around the romantic plotline, or sometimes it's way more interesting than whatever fights they're having, you know? So yeah, totally. Like romance is everywhere. It's not like you suddenly cut it out when you move into the superhero, because how boring would that be if it was just like a bunch of friends that weren't being romantic and sexy? Like also, like WandaVision. Sorry, I had to bring it up.
I was waiting. I was like, someone's gonna talk as soon as they start talking. Continue.
I'm not gonna say anything about the plot because I know a lot of people are waiting till they all come out. But that has a lot of romance in it, and it's superhero, and it's like directly like hinges on the romantic relationship between the two of them. So.
Well, I mean, in a lot of those sort of big superhero properties, a lot of the biggest moments, a lot of the biggest decisions come down to loving someone or hating someone or some kind of emotion, you know. Like I've always said that one of the things I was trying for in heroine conflicts was like this idea that it was sort of like the X-Men, but with certain parts cut out or certain parts emphasized more. And one of the reasons I always liked the X-Men was because they were the team that spent just as much time talking and fighting about their feelings as they did saving the world. You know, a lot of their big battles, they're like fighting this like great cosmic force, and they're like, I can't believe you said that to me, or like, I can't believe you were flirting with that other person. Like, it's like very like it's very like in the DNA of that. And, you know, same thing with something like, you know, Superman, like Lois and Clark. Like, a lot of the big moments for that character have revolved around key moments in that relationship. So it's interesting that like sort of like what you take from these properties is like what you want to see, or like what you are naturally biased towards appreciating, or whatever. But even if you think back to like the last moments of the last Avengers movie of Endgame, that was, and you know, I won't spoil it just in case after several years you have not seen it, but that revolved entirely around a romance. That revolved entirely around a deep emotional connection between two people that was so great. There was confusing time travel involved. So, you know, like all of these things are very inherent, I think, to the DNA, because some of it is just about how we connect as people.
In the new Spider-Man movies are basically John Hughes movies. Like, they're like, that's what I think about when I watch them, and I love it. I'm here. It's like my favorite Spider-Man movies, because it's not just about Spider-Man being sad, or like, you know, it's much more fun and romantic than the other depictions of him.
I always thought that was really cool, how especially those Spider-Man movies, and how they I'll say what was pretty well done about a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that, you know, it's kind of like the same world, but seen through the lens of whoever that movie was about at that time. So I thought taking the Spider-Man movies, that extra and making it like what a teenager's eyes would, how it would feel in a teenager's world. Like, everything's just very amplified and like hormonal, and lots of love and lots of like drama and, you know, peril and all of this stuff, with this kind of wonderful lightheartedness to it. That feels, I thought those were really, really well done in that way, and I hope they continue. Instead of, like you said about the first Spider-Man movies, which I enjoyed, but they were almost like you were watching outside, instead of these, where it's kind of, it feels like his inner world kind of like played out on top of the world.
Yeah, there's like an optimistic love in it.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you look back at the original ones, the Sam Raimi ones with like Tobey Maguire, what do people remember from that first one? The upside down kiss. Like, that is,
oh my God,
that's the one image that everybody remembers from that movie. It's not like him swinging around or fighting something. It's the kiss.
So like my friends, like I had groups of friends who like purposely went places to reenact that kiss. Like, it was a movement in my like little teenage world, and it was like, oh, did you try the Spider-Man kiss? And that's totally what we all took away from it. You're absolutely correct.
If that movie was released now, that would totally be like a TikTok challenge, like to replicate.
I'm so glad TikTok wasn't around when I was a teenager.
So we have a Facebook question. This is from Esther. And this is a question for everyone. What kind of romance tropes do you absolutely love, and why?
Like in comics? Sorry.
I'm not saying either.
Go for it, Sydney.
Oh, no, I need a moment to process. If you'll give me the moment, someone else wants to go first.
Well, I was going to say I like the happy ending. I like that you can, which is, you know, kind of a romance trope where like, oh, you got to have the happy ending. But it feels, which seems like you wouldn't want that kind of restraint on a story. But I feel like if you, with that trope in place, you can swing very far, because if the reader expects that you're going to bring them home in a nice, you know, like romantically fulfilling way, then you can go really extreme with the romance and the highs and lows and what goes on and the journey that your lovers are going through, or people who are entangled in this, you know, web of romance. So I always thought that was a really cool trope that's kind of locked in. Not fully. You could do it, take it out. But if it's in, then you can really swing for it, I think.
So in my research, in terms of romance comics, there was two so the visual trope. So like when a girl is bad in a romance comic, she's always in a red dress, which I'm just obsessed with, and I point out to everyone, like, and it's in every talk I've ever given on I just have like pages of women in red dresses because it's funny. And the other one, because I find it, and it's not just in romance comics, it's in other ones too, but it's very much in romance comics, is the spanking. Like the way that men can just spank women in these comics, and it's just like it's just a normal thing. Like this professor did it to the student, and then she's like, oh, I'm gonna work harder at my math homework now, and in the end they get married. Like, and it's just like this. I'm like, can you imagine if that was in a modern context? So I'm obsessed with that. And then and in terms of reading romance, though, for my own enjoyment, I always like it. Like I just love like when they catch the evil boy, the mean boyfriend, like at the truth moment, and then she realizes she should be with this nicer guy. Like I always love, which is in romance comics too, but that's always very satisfying to me.
I think I love, all the classics. I like Enemies to Lovers. Since I am imprinted on Han and Leia, I feel like that's just like ingrained in my person. There's Just One Bed, of course. What are some like Grumpy Sunshine, where like one person is like very grouchy and the other one is just like, sweet and happy. Like I love that. I love pretty much every trope. There aren't that many that some people have things that they really don't like. Like I know that the secret baby is like very controversial.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I always feel like it's in the execution. I think that a really talented writer can make me love a trope that I think I hate. A really great execution or a really great sort of recontextualizing of a certain trope can make me enjoy that trope, even if I don't usually enjoy it. So I tend to love a lot of the classics that I mentioned, but I also try to keep an open mind, because certainly there have been tropes that I thought I wouldn't like, that when they're in the hands of a really talented writer who has a really interesting take on it, I end up enjoying it. So yeah, I like a little bit of everything.
What about awkwardly dressed girl? Like somehow I saw someone tweet about this and I was like, oh my gosh, that completely influenced my whole life. Like I must have read this somewhere. It's like her socks don't quite match, which my socks never match, or like she's wearing a hoodie and jeans and she just looks so casually attractive. I'm like, that's completely like, that's my complete look. Like I must have read it somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's one of those things that's like, as long as it's done well, it's done with nuance. It's not something that just sort of stands in for the whole character. Like there's a thing it's not really a trope. Like when I think of romance tropes, I think of things like enemies to lovers. There's just one bed, like things like that. But as far as like attributes of characters, what like something that's very controversial that I've talked about a lot is the Asian girl hair streak. Because for a while there was kind of a thing where white creators would give their Asian girl character like a blue or a purple hair streak to sort of signal, oh, she's not like your usual Asian. She's rebellious. Like she's cool. She doesn't take any crap. Like she's no nonsense. And so someone sort of picked up on that and was like, this is like weird that this hair streak is like the new stand-in. And I had kind of a feeling about that because I had written in Heroine Complex, the third protagonist of the third book has blue and purple hair streaks and is an Asian girl. And I think when I wrote the first book, that hadn't been really identified as like, this is like a weird thing that people seem to be doing. But it had sort of become that by the time it was time for me to write her book. So I was like, do I need to change this? Like, should she not have the hair streaks? Is this like, and then I thought about it and I was kind of like, okay, first of all, this is a lead character. In my opinion, she's very well fleshed out. She has other attributes. She, has a lot of stuff going on. And there are real Asian girls with hair streaks. So I think it's weird to tell them that they are a stereotype when they're a real person. And what I sort of came to from that, and I think this can be useful when we're talking about any kind of trope or any kind of sort of character type, is that I think a stereotype is really not the presence of one trait, but the absence of all others. So if you have like a hair streak and you're like, this is this character's entire personality, this is to show you that she's rebellious, obviously that's a problem. If it's a fully fleshed out character, then it's a character, and it probably represents a lot of people in real life. And, you know, same thing with what you're saying about sort of a quirky dress girl. As you said, you're like, this is me in real life. So obviously this exists. And as long as it's not sort of put in there to be like, you know, like there was kind of a thing in like the 90s where it was like the clumsy hero and she always falls down. She's beautiful, but trips over everything. And it was like, if that is the only thing, like to show you that even though she's beautiful, she has problems, like, I don't think that's very good character building. But if it's part of an entire personality, then it's something I can start to, you know, to consume and to deal with.
That makes sense. Like,
Okay, Steve.
Oh, it's my turn. Sorry.
Your turn.
I'm thinking about everything at once now.
I know it's hard. I'm thinking of questions I want to ask you guys. I'm like, no, I'm in the middle of a question. I can't ask them another question.
I think in terms of tropes, you know, I like a cinnamon roll hero in romance. And part of that goes to, you know, you're always looking for the person you want to be or the person you are in a novel. And so like I try, you know, I want to be that person in real life. So that's kind of what I gravitate towards. But as Sarah said, you know, it depends on the practitioner. Like, you know, sometimes someone can get you to love a thing or like connect with a character you never would have. You know, like you're reading a series and like you absolutely hate this side character, and then they're the hero in the next book, and you're like, oh, I would do anything for this person. You know, so there's always it really depends on the person, you know, and what you connect with personally out of it. You know, I never thought I would love a single POV book, and I just read Kate Clayborne's Love Lettering. And she just does it so well that it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you don't care that you're not ever inside the male main character's head. It doesn't matter. You've just been taken on this journey, and you just enjoy it for what it is.
I'm like waiting an extra few seconds now, just in case one of you starts talking so I don't talk over you. But I think that's the end of that question. So I was going to talk a little bit about the importance of diversity in romance and graphic novels, because that's something that you guys have all talked a little bit about, especially Sarah talking about the hair, because in just romance as a genre itself, separate from graphic novels, there's a lot of talk that I've seen about like people and hair and like descriptions of hair, because I don't know if people know this, but different people have different hair and you have to treat it differently. And the same goes for like graphic novels and how that is used in moments, and even how like the art, how hair is depicted. So that was going to my mind when you were talking about it. I'm like, oh, I need to figure out how to like ask about this. So we can kind of maybe ask about that, talking about like the importance of like diversity in like graphic novels and romance, like body representation, like all the stuff. And I guess what are you seeing more represented that you're enjoying, or what do you want to see more of represented in, and I guess we can do romance or graphic novels and comics, or together. Did I jumble that question, or?
No, I'm excited about the question. I'm just waiting for other people
It's
to
a
go
big
first.
question too. I'm sorry, but I'm not.
What I'd like to, one thing that I found interesting about this current moment that we're in, where there's more visibility on, you know, on all sorts of people who haven't had the spotlight on by the mainstream. This whole time is the blowback, where some folks think that like we're a fad or something, or a trend, and we're not. We're people. We're here. We're always here, and we always will be here. I find that very interesting how, and it makes me worry a little bit in terms of not for us, but for the mainstream's perception of us, that it could be a trend for them and then it shifts somewhere else. Because I'll speak for the African American tradition in romance novels. There have been like African American romance novels like going way back, like, and they haven't always had a history of getting big five publishers to publish them, but a lot of them were published by other means, small publishing presses, self-published, all sorts of stuff. So okay, so things that I just wanted to say that, but things that I want to see more of, I just want to see more of. I just want to see it all. I want to see more stories about more types of people and more experiences. Because one of the joys of reading, I think for everyone, is putting yourself in, like, seeing yourself reflected in a different light through character. Where you're just like, oh, that's interesting. Like, it gives you a new perspective on things. And if you are kind of closer to the character, it's easier to take the leap sometimes. It kind of walks you to the door a little bit better. And the other thing is when you see characters that are totally unlike you, characters who have, different, sexual orientation, gender, different abilities, like it gives you this whole different perspective of the world that you hadn't considered. And it's this wonderful adventure, just as much as reading a book from 18 whatever, how exciting that is to be in some Victorian novel and like, well, what's this world like? Is the same as being in someone who is your neighbor, but you've never seen the world from their perspective. So I think having this wonderful time with this, like, which we could definitely use more. Like, it's still not enough. We're like this garden that's growing of all this wonderful, you can have this wonderfully diverse garden of things to pick and choose from instead of, eating potatoes, and rice and bread all the time. You can kind of have all this cool stuff to snack on. So that's I'm very optimistic and hopeful and excited about, like, all the new stuff. I just want to see a lot of new stuff. I want to see lots of everything, old stuff, lots of new stuff, lots of just more.
Yeah, what you were talking about, how, like, what's mainstream, what's a fad. Was it last week? Time has no more meaning. Last week, I had a chat with Beverly Jenkins, and she is an amazing Black historical romance novelist, and she's just incredible. And whenever I talk to her, I just get nervous because she's Beverly Jenkins. And before we had started the live chat, we were talking about the fact that February, Black History Month, and a lot of organizations treat it as like, okay, we've gotten our Black creators, our Black authors for the year. That box is checked, we're good. And it's like, no, I think we get so absorbed in these themes and these months and these fads that we forget, like, everyone's important every month of the year. We need to be promoting these people all the time. And that's just something that immediately started talking about that. I was like, oh my God, I was just talking about this with Beverly Jenkins. So I think that readers, publishers, libraries, we need to be promoting the things that we aren't seeing enough of, because that's how we help build it, we help lift it up, we help support it. So I just wanted to, like, pop that in there.
Exactly. Stories about groups that aren't usually seen, but that aren't always about, you could have stories about people of color that aren't about race. You could have stories about, characters, different genders that aren't about, like, they are just people in the world who happen to have to particular dragon in this particular moment in their life, I would like to see more of that from publishers to take that, to be brave, take that chance and believe that the reader will follow a good character. They don't really need to follow a good character. Like if it's a Black character, it does not need to be about race. It could be about, just give us a good character and a challenge, and you can have people of, because everybody has challenges. Everybody in this world, no matter how good you have it, like everyone's got them, and everyone has a story, and those stories don't have to be, this person's life as it is made harder when rubbing up against the mainstream. Like there's all sorts of other stuff that goes on in our lives.
Yeah, I think just speaking on the Romancelandia side of it, romance has gone through this huge reckoning in the last 18 months. Has it been that long? Oh God. And it sort of started at the 2019 Romance Writers of America conference, where I helped out with this giant exhibit where we talked about these trailblazers of romance who are writing queer stories and Black stories and Latinx stories and all of these things. And then there sort of came, like you were saying, Johnny, this giant backlash happened literally like days later, that they weren't directly related, but it sort of showed there's this push-pull of there's progress being made amongst the community that isn't always reflected in kind of the establishment part of things. And I think there's been a lot of movement in positive directions. There are all these stories in romance, and certainly in indie comics and things. It's just getting that traction. And I think in romance, Twitter and social media generally have been a huge help in building the audience for a lot of these authors. Yeah, I think that's where I was going with it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, it's interesting to hear everyone's take on this, because it certainly like swirls around a lot of things that I deal with, every day, that I've been thinking about for a while. But I think what's really interesting about, what you guys were kind of talking about, as far as like, we only read Black authors in February, or like May is Asian month, we only read Asian authors in May.
I just can't.
I have also developed this like weird reaction. Well, it's not a weird reaction. It's probably just a correct reaction. When white readers, whether they are librarians, teachers, whatever, sort of treat my books like vegetables, like, oh, good for you. Like, it's sort of like this weird, like like with I Love You So Mochi, which is a prose rom-com. It's a very sweet, like, this Japanese American girl goes to Japan for the first time. She falls in love with this guy who moonlights as a costume mochi mascot. Like, it's just very cute. It's about, family and different kinds of love, and kind of falling in love for the first time, and all the beautiful sights of Japan and the non-sentient desserts and all that. And I remember like seeing this review where someone was like, well, this book was fine, but it didn't teach me anything about Japanese culture. And
like, that's your job.
Right.
I mean, I know about Japanese culture, so I don't really feel like I need to walk that out for you as a lesson. Like, this is not meant to be a textbook. It is a story. And I have a reaction to people sort of acting like my books, because they are written and focus on Asian American girls and women, is like they need to teach me something. They need to center the white reader. And I'm like, I'm sorry, again, you are not the audience I'm centering here. I'm centering an audience that looks like me, which has been very underserved. And I don't need to teach that audience about Japanese culture. That is not something they need to learn about. So obviously that's part of the texture of the book, but it is not the point of the book. And so I think like it's interesting because you see these efforts that are, I think, you know, coming from like not a bad place, but they sort of come off a certain way. Like during the Asian month, there's usually a bunch of bingo cards where people are like, here's a bingo card of like all the different, you know, read a book by a biracial author, read a book about, and it's like, I mean, can't you just do that all the time? Like, why does it have to be part of like a lesson or like a bingo card? That feels a little bit weird that you would sort of spotlight me in that way at one point and then decide that you're going to forget about me for the rest of the year. That just seems very odd. But I think as far as, you know, what I would like to see is, you know, along the lines of what Johnnie was saying, just more everything. I think everybody deserves to see themselves in these very joyful stories. I think everybody deserves to see themselves as a hero or someone who's worthy of being centered in a story. And I would really love to get to a place where we can have books written and starring both like marginalized people, but also people who are marginalized along perhaps multiple axes. Like, you know, my friend C.B. Lee writes this great series called Sidekick Squad, which is a YA about teenage heroes, you know, superheroes of color. And the first book, the main character is Asian American and bisexual, which CB is in real life. And I know she got some comments where people are like, isn't that a bit much? Like, isn't it a bit much that you have like all of that in one character? And she was like, well, I'm a real person. Again, like, am I too much just like as a real person? But it's weird how that sort of like narrative has persisted. You know, I've heard the term diversity checklist. Why do you have this character that checks all these boxes? It's like, no, that's just a character. That's a person that can exist in real life. Our society is broad. We have many different kinds of people in it. Really, only one kind of person has been centered in stories for many, many years. So shouldn't we try to make it so that now our stories reflect reality? Like it's not just like this is a diverse story. It's like, no, this is a realistic story because our society is not just populated by one kind of person. So I would really like to see that. And I would also like to see more of an openness towards diversity within communities. You know, the AAPI, that's a very broad umbrella. It encompasses many different kinds of identities. And at least until somewhat recently, I think sometimes the urge with, from publishers and sort of like marketing and things like that was to flatten that and be like, this is just an Asian book. This is an Asian book. That's all it's about. Like, it's one thing. And there's sort of this one way of being Asian that can be acceptable to everyone. And, you know, I would like to see more of a willingness to embrace stories that are willing to tell all different kinds of stories within a community, because within every community, there is a lot of diversity.
Guess it's my turn. I loved all these answers. They're really good. So I study romance comics from like the 1947 onwards. And so we all know there wasn't a lot of diversity. And it was white women, right? White women. Except for, I will say, there was a lot of, especially in Simon Kirby's work, a lot of class struggles were present. So there was some, and those were more diverse. But and there was a lot of, like, they tried to do Negro romance, and that was cut after 4 issues because it was like, no, that's not our audience. Our audience is white women. And but I should say there were African American romance magazines that republished at the same time, but those were written by white men, and they wouldn't let Black or African American women write them until the 60s. So, do with that what you will. And then they would sometimes feature an African American woman if she was a maid. And then you get into, I think it was like the 70s, you start seeing other representations, but they're problematic, like my Mexican lover, and so that's not very great. So, I try to address those issues as I go along, but it's easy to historically contextualize those and talk about them, and no one's making them anymore. So I'm not like battling with people about creating these comics. I will say though, in terms of researching them, I always feel like I have to like it's considered an anomaly that I'm researching romance comics. It's always like, yes, I do these comics that I have to signal that they were created by Simon and Kirby, who also created Captain America. And you know, it's part of this very mainstream white male comic book culture. And that can get like, I want to be able just to say like romance comics and have that be its own topic and not embed it in this like very specific nostalgic fandom narrative. So I would like to see more diversity in how we approach this sort of research. But as a consumer, as a white woman, I don't feel like I can really complain about finding myself in romance novels or any sort of novel. Like I'm there, like and if I want something very complex, you know, there's Margaret Atwood, whose books I love. Like if I want to look at For My Suffering, it's there. Like, you know, and I love Liam Moriarty, and I love it. And I feel like it's definitely gotten I don't feel like I can complain at this point, but I would like to see, you know, other stories in there. And it would be nice to not feel like I'm, you know, that I have like the whole comment about like you're reading vegetables. Like I thought that was brilliant. And I feel like when people from my demographic, when we're like, hey, guess what? I read this novel written by a Black woman or by like a trans person. We tend to promote it that way. And I would like to see the conversation, like it become just part of a natural conversation. And I think there really is a problem, and I've been trying to figure out how to better participate as someone who's not so marginalized. So
I think librarians definitely fall into that trap.
yes,
You know,
and people in academics do, like we do,
yeah.
We fall into it and we're kind of forced into it, but then we get comfortable in it.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I've noticed that a lot of times, speaking about librarians, a lot of times, sometimes my books won't end up on like the Black History Month thing. They're not about race, they're just Black people doing stuff. And I've always found it interesting which list I'm not included on because of that. Like it's not vegetables in that particular way.
Right.
I think that, well, just speaking as a librarian, and I've been having this conversation with my coworkers, that we just get so absorbed in like themes, like, oh, this month we're going to focus on these books and we're going to promote these books and we're going to promote them like this. Oh, this month is for this and we're going to promote these. I'm just like, that needs to stop being the first thought in our minds when we see something like, oh, this is an Indigenous author. It'll be perfect for like Native American month. Like we need to stop thinking about things that way, because it's how we're taught to think about it. And I think that's something that's definitely in like the institution of how we're taught about these things. So it's like, we definitely need to get away. Sydney, like you were saying, like we need to get away from all of that and look at things a different way and try to promote all the different voices and all the different stories. And I'm trying, but I'm just one librarian in one little library, but I'm trying. So we had a longish Facebook question from Michael Dooley, and it's asking a bit about like the history, more of like the history of graphic novels and romance comics. So I'm going to read it in the entire question, and I'm not sure who wants to answer, but anyone can answer. So, oh, okay. He wants each of you to answer. So could each of you go beyond general comments about the topic to focus on specific and significant romance comics and graphic novels over the decades and generations? I'm particularly interested in the dynamics between the text and the art of these stories. And I'm just going to say maybe the ones that you have spoken to you can talk about, or ones that you've noticed, because that's a very large question. But it's a good question. Thank you, Michael.
For those of you who don't know, Michael Dooley is he's written for Print Magazine, and he's very involved in the comic world and knows a lot about everything. So his questions are always. Johnny, I think you were answering and I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I love Love and Rockets. That's the one I would point to. It's based in California. Particularly the Jaime Hernandez stories are the ones that speak to me. The Maggie stories, and those have this really beautiful long form romance. In that Love and Rockets has been published for 30-something years now. So it has that serialized, like unresolved quality to it. However, there are times where he will resolve a storyline and he'll do like a time jump and you catch up later. Yeah, romance comics. I don't know if it's. I think it is considered romance comics, but I mean I consider it a romance comic, and it's probably my favorite comic book series of all time. It's a series that actually got me to. There was a point in time where I didn't want to do comics professionally anymore. I was going to just let that dream die. And then reading Love and Rockets, it like not only got me excited about comics again, but like made me want to create them. All-time favorite romance comic, I would say, for me.
Okay, I did not expect anyone's answer to make me get all teary. So
Such a sweet answer. I mean, in terms of, so I think if I can remember Michael's question, so it was
I can repeat it.
I think it's like about important, like what I think is a really important contribution, I guess, to like a specific, and for mine, it's, you know, it's 1950s. I'm doing a project right now on Matt Baker. I think he was a very important comic book artist. I think his artwork was very important. I'm trying to determine how important it was at the time it was created versus how we're mythologizing him now as a Black man, and kind of tease that out a little bit. But so, and by the way, Ken Quattro did a great book with a chapter on him. But his artwork was just very influential. People copied him. He drew beautiful women that, you know, really affected how other people in romance comics drew women. He had a very interesting relationship with Vince Colletta, who was very influenced by him. So it very much, like, he, in terms of just how he influenced his peers at the time, he was significant, and how he is thought of now is very significant. And so I would have to say, if I'm going to answer like a very like about the artwork, that, and also because he had such, in terms of like visual and text, he had a very close relationship with Dana Dutch, who wrote a lot of the romance comics that Matt Baker illustrated. So you can see when you read those, the way Matt Baker draws his stories really reflects the text in it in a way that not all romance comics do. Like, he very much captures, Dana Dutch always says he tried to like draw and write realistic romance stories about teenage girls. They were not realistic. I don't know what teenage girls he knew, but they were like some of the most dramatic stories I have ever read, like ever. And so, but Matt Baker really captured that drama within this and within his illustration. So I would say, I think that's for me the most significant right now. I probably will change. I might change my mind like in 10 years from researching another artist. So.
I mean, I think I have kind of two answers. One, in terms of like the comics that kind of stick out the most to me, I think about a lot of the covers from the 70s, a lot of the My Love covers. You know, my favorite is the Woodstock cover, which I think is My Love.
Yeah, I own that one.
I came, you know, it says I came for the music. I didn't think the price of admission would be my heart. Like, that's a tagline right there.
Romance comics.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of those stories were extremely regressive, so it's hard to recommend those stories. But in terms of like romance comics that I've connected with, Saga is always the one I think of. You know, I started reading it around the time I became a parent. So it kind of like I really connected with the sort of the struggles they're going through and the identity crises and all of these things that are going on at the same time. That's the one that always sticks out to me. And I heard there's a new one coming at some point. So yeah, that's the one that always pops out to my mind.
I can think of a few. I think some books that were very kind of formative to me, and I don't know if I would characterize them as capital R romance, but they're the sort of contemporary set books that have romance as one of the main plots. Were these books that kind of came out, I think, you know, circa the early aughts. And they were usually on Oni, and they kind of centered around these sprawling casts of interesting people that, you know, were either related to each other or hooking up with each other, but, you know, there was always some kind of love or romance that was integral to the plot. So one of those was Blue Monday by China Clugston. And it was just like, actually, Sydney, you might like this book because it was kind of like grown-up Archie. Like it was, you know, a group of fun teenage friends, like fighting and getting into hijinks and falling in love with each other. And it was just very like fun and real. And it felt kind of like how teenagers actually are, especially during that era. Another one is Hopeless Savages, which was written by Jen Van Meter and drawn by a variety of artists, but I think probably most often Christine Norrie. And that was about a family it was a little bit like the Osbournes, like one of the parents' last name is Hopeless and one of their last names is Savage. So when they hyphenate, they're Hopeless Savage. So everyone is like first name Hopeless Savage. And they're kind of like rock and roll family, like they're a little bit bohemian, but they all love each other very deeply. And then of course they all go off and have like their own adventures and their own romances. But these kind of influence my own writing because I do tend to write very sprawling casts. I do tend to write, you know, either families or fan families who go off and, you know, have their hijinks and their romances with other people. So those, just like the vibe they had, I feel like was very formative to me, and was also kind of like me discovering things that were not big two superhero comics, which I still love, but you know, that sort of showed me that like there are other comics out there that sort of discuss other topics that you can read. Another one that I enjoyed more recently is Chester 5000, which is like robot Victorian erotica. It is by a writer artist named Jess Fink. And those books are very sexy and very imaginative and lead to lots of interesting pairings and romance formations. So I recommend those a lot. And then kind of a newer classic, I think, is Mooncakes by Wendy Xu and Suzanne Walker. And that is it is a little bit Miyazaki. It's very like gentle, kind of warm, cozy magic. And it is a story about first young love, but the young love is between like, you know, witches and werewolves and like fantastical things like that. And that book is like very romantic and very beautiful. And I think it captures like a certain spirit that we don't always see, because it feels like that sort of warm, like everyday kind of thing, but it also has this magic running through it. And I thought that was really beautiful, because I think a lot of times when we think about fantasy, even contemporary fantasy, it's like, you know, big high stakes dragons, like Game of Thrones, like everything is falling apart at all times, like people are fighting with swords, like, you know. And this, I felt like the focus of this was definitely on the romance, the sort of reaction, the relationships between the different characters. And it just gave me that feeling that romance so often gives me, which is like afterwards, I just felt like, you know, I had been like covered in a blanket and like hugged for 2 hours. So I think like, especially for the current times, if you would like a book that is gentle and lovely and very romantic, that is a good one to read.
I'll dig you up on it. I decided to recently read The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood, and I was like, maybe that was a bad decision when I'm already in a bad mood. I actually had a question for all of you, because so I don't know if you get this question. People like always come up to me, like they'll be like, "Hey, Sydney, does this count as a romance?" Like I constantly get I have to decide if something counts as a romance comic or technically a romance. I was wondering if you get people who also ask you all like about like for your expertise on like I always find it funny. It's like they don't want to say something's a romance without getting someone to verify it, and I don't really get why that happens. So I was wondering if you all experienced that as well.
Never experienced that.
Oh.
Luckily.
I mean, I think sometimes like there's sort of two, for me, like conversations that come up. One is I remember the sort of the first fiction thing I wrote that kind of got me some attention and eventually got me an agent and like sent me on the author path was actually a novella that was originally a serialized story online that I wrote for some friends. It was definitely a romance. It was a rom-com. It was very much billed that way. It was about a geek girl who is like a reporter, and she goes to this comic book convention, and she is trying to find this action figure that she keeps losing like all of her life. And then there's someone else trying to get the action figure. And anyway, it is obviously a romance. And it was because I was so part of the geek community, a lot of geek guys read it who had, you know, not really read a capital R romance before. And I remember a couple of them said to me, you tricked me into reading a romance and I liked it. And I was like, well, I didn't really trick you because the copy kind of clearly states what it is. And I don't feel like this is mysterious. And also I called it a rom-com, so I don't understand how that's mysterious either. But there's almost like this weird like idea of what a romance is if you don't read them, that I think is that may lead to some surprises when you do actually read a romance. So that comes up a lot. And then I think the other argument, which is another thing that I think comes at Romancelandia sometimes and is just pushed back against immediately, is there's always someone who's like, why does it have to have a happy ending? Why is it the HEA? Why is the happily ever after? Like, that's so predictable. Like, these books are so predictable. Like, and the answer is always like, okay, like if you're writing a murder mystery, do you complain that they solve the whodunit? Like, that is part of the genre. And there's so many different things you can do with it. It's, it's about the journey. And again, like a lot of that is in the execution. Like a lot of my favorite romance novels, I know they're going to get together. There is that sort of promise of the premise. There is that expectation of the book that is marked romance. But I still get a little worried towards the end. Like I still have that sort of like, I really want this. Is it going to happen? Like, is it, I can't wait to see like how they, I'm so swept up into the story that I'm not thinking like, oh, this is so predictable. Like, obviously they're going to end up together. Like that is a testament to someone's craft that they can still make me worry about that. But it seems like every couple months there's someone who comes in and is like, I'm going to blow the doors off the genre, which again, the genre does not need you to do that. It is perfectly successful on its own. I'm going to write a romance without the HEA. And people are like, well, it's not a romance then. Like that is not a romance. But for some reason, and again, I think it goes back to that like sort of prizing things that are dark, prizing like all of that over joy and pleasure. That someone's like, oh, this is like how I will get taken more seriously and like show all the romance people like how it's done. And it's like, no, that is the happily ever after. That is a feature. That is not a bug. And that is just part of the genre, just like how every genre has different elements. If I write a heroine complex book where no one has superpowers, and there's no magic, there's no demons, there's no anything supernatural, and it's just kind of them hanging out. It's not a fantasy novel, it's a contemporary novel. So, I think like every time this comes up, like I'm not surprised because it comes up all the time, but I'm also kind of like, what do you think is happening here? And also, why do you think this is something that will be appreciated? One of the things we love about romance is we know there is going to be that happily ever after.
Yeah, and I should clarify one reason why some people ask me that is because I push back a lot on how people define romance comics, and when they incorrectly call something a romance comic, and like the specific genre of romance comics during the 1950s to like 1960s. But I like the way it's like no one complains about knowing how a superhero comic is going to end. Like we all know he's going to get the bad guy usually. I mean, I haven't read all superhero comics, so I may be wrong, but.
Well, at least at the library, if any patron wants a romance, I'm the person that gets pulled into that conversation. And I run the romance book club, so. It's like, but I haven't read all romance. Like, I'm probably gonna have to look it up still.
There's so much romance out there, it's impossible to read all romance. Do you think
And I
Leah
mean,
Moriarty romance? Like Big Little Lies and it was like Three Sisters and all that. I've read all of her books, Nine Strangers. I think that there's a lot of romance in them, but they definitely don't always end happy. So I'm not sure.
I would say no. I have enjoyed her books a lot as well, but I think they are more like, you know, domestic suspense or thriller, or, you know, because in those, the romance is also usually not the main plot. It is like an element of the story, but it's not necessarily the thing that we're going to end on. It's not necessarily the driver of the plot. Like she writes such, you know, it's kind of these like almost backwards whodunits. It's like, we know what happened, but we don't really know why. Like I feel like a lot of them have more in common with like mystery or.
Yeah, they definitely, always something creepy happening. And then also I always feel like it's very much about domestic struggle.
Yeah.
Like how people struggle when they're living in houses together or something.
Which is probably something everyone can relate to, right?
Probably why I love them.
Okay, so we are now a minute over. So I'm going to get to the end questions because I have to be the responsible one to make sure that you guys, I don't just keep you here forever, even though it's really tempting. And so I'm going to close with what fun projects are you working on? And I'm really curious, Johnnie, are you going to write more romance? Because you did a pretty good job.
I want to. I already have like 3 different like kind of, I already kind of sketched out and I'm having so much fun even just like whether they're made or not, I'm having so much fun making them, you know, and like having the characters sort of bloom is really exciting. But we'll see. Hopefully, I have more than 4 actually. Anyway, we'll see. But right now I'm working on the first of 3 books for Rally. I'm going to be doing some middle grade books, and I'm very, very excited to be like writing these and making these and yeah, I don't know if like they announced what they're about yet. Anyway, keep your eyes open for them. They'll start in 2022, and it's going to be really exciting. You know, characters, all the main characters are going to be Black, because I remember being a Black kid and loving comics and loving all these stories, but never really seeing myself. And then just kind of just like accepting that it's just kind of like the way things were. And so I'm excited to be able to like create these really cool comics for kids that have them not just centered, but also like from their perspective. So it's not, they don't have to explain, you know, the world to someone else, because we're just cutting right past the explanation to someone who looks like the character reading a story about, sort of like reflected in the way it's reflected, not in a way that's kind of looking towards this audience past them to explain. So that's just, this is kind of one of the funnest things about being a writer just in general, but this has a little bit more importance to me because it's for younger readers. And like, and I remember viscerally what that felt like. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. So keep your eyes open. Harper Alley 2022 is when they start.
That's awesome. Yay!
I've been reading a lot of middle grade comics, just to let you know, because they're amazing. Like, they're just really good.
Yeah, amazing.
And Sarah, what's next for you? What are you working on?
I have a few things coming out this year. I wrote last year a Star Wars book that was originally an audio original about Dr. Aphra, who is one of the most amazing characters in the Star Wars universe. She's kind of like a morally gray Indiana Jones. She goes around and gets, you know, like intergalactic artifacts. And actually with that one, I did write a romance plot. It is not a romance because it does not have a happy ending, because Dr. Aphra is kind of a jerk. In a fun way, but she's kind of a jerk. But that is coming out in hardcover in April. And then in May is the From Little Tokyo with Love book, which is a YA rom-com. It's set in Little Tokyo, which is a beautiful neighborhood in Los Angeles, which, you know, we can't really go outside right now. So I hope people get like the feeling they would have being in Little Tokyo, since we can't like go hang out there a lot right now. So that one's definitely a romance. There's lots of, you know, kissing and dancing and delightful teenage antics. The fifth book in my heroine series, which is called Hollywood Heroines, also set in LA, is coming out in July. And then I actually wrote another volume of an Archie middle grade graphic novel series, which the first one was about Betty. It's basically the Archie kids in middle school. So the first one was about Betty, and the second one is about Veronica. And they're a little young to be, well, in my, you know, like they're a little young to be having like full-fledged romances, but they do certainly have a lot of friendship issues and various, you know, middle school entanglements. So those are the things I have coming out this year, and I'm working on, as most writers are, a bunch of secret things. I do have another graphic novel project that hasn't been announced yet, that is not a capital R romance, but it, kind of like Shadow of the Batgirl, it does have romance in it. And my editor and I have actually attempted to construct a romance quadrangle. So we'll see how that goes.
Sarah, I'm kind of
Man,
worried
you
that
and Johnny just,
sorry.
I was gonna say, you guys sound so busy. I'm like, I hope that you guys like relax a little bit. Like, I'm sending relaxing vibes towards you.
Thank
I was
Take care of
gonna say,
yourselves so you can make more.
I think I'm gonna become Sarah's next biggest fan, because Star Wars, like, I'm obsessed with. By the way, I rewatched the original trilogy growing up like every week. So and in Betty and Brett, I'm just gonna read all your work now.
No one hates hearing that.
Johnny, I'll
I'm
read
just
your
gonna
work too.
say really.
Something else is coming out in April. I forgot to mention the second volume of Tartarus, which is all sure, you know, that's, you know, what it's billed as. But the second arc, don't tell anybody in the comic shop, is basically 2 romance stories with action and sci-fi intertwined in between. It we have this warlord, and we have this, you know, warden of the warlord, like kind of stuck on this alien world, and they hate each other. And over space and time and all these adventures and things that happen to them, we see their lives unfold in this way where like love is like the overarching theme of the whole thing. And it's been a real fun like arc of the series. So check that out. It's coming out in April. It's like one of the hardest things I've had to like I ever wrote, because of like trying to, it's almost reverse engineering a romance story to work as a sci-fi instead of like a sci-fi with a romance plot. Like it's almost like, so it still reads like a sci-fi, like if you're looking at it for the sci-fi, but meanwhile, like all the things that I'm like, you know, pinging are like romance arc, you know, necessities. So I lost language there for a bit. So yeah, April 28th, second volume of Tartarus.
I kind of wish that we could have got, like, I could have gone first so that I wouldn't follow up like their amazing announcements with like with my announcements. But I do I do have, okay, so I mean, I've been working on a few publication projects I can't really talk about right now, but I will say that I do have another talk on romance comics coming up, not this Saturday, but next Saturday with the Michigan Comics Forum. And extra cool because it's with Joan Omrod, who does a lot of really great research on romance comics in the UK, and with Trina Robbins, who I don't think I need to explain who Trina Robbins is to people, but just in case, she was the first woman to draw Wonder Woman for a comic. She wrote Girls to Girls. She's coming out with a book on Glass Park. She's just done everything. She started the underground women's comic movement, you know, everything. So if you want to see some cool people, especially like those cool people, I would suggest you come check that out.
And Steve, you told me that you just acquired something super cool.
Oh yeah. So I'm you know, doing this withdrawal thing where I don't have 10,000 comics outside my office anymore. So I've started to look at sort of collecting my own stuff. And one of the things I've always been interested in is in 2007, Harlequin did manga in the US.
Right.
So or introduced manga in the US. So they had been doing manga in Japan since 1996 or 7. And so these were really, they're a fascinating translation project, which I'll go into in a blog post on romancehistory.com at some point. But basically, they take a Harlequin, as they had been doing since the 1980s, and translated it for a Japanese audience. So they're not just translating the text verbatim, but translating idioms and settings and cultural norms. They were then in the 90s started turning them into manga. And so this is really interesting because they basically took the manga, printed it in either purple or pink, and translated it back to English, but from the manga. So not, so it in some cases bears very little resemblance to the original book from the 80s that they had translated. So they're really interesting. And so they partnered with Dark Horse and did 6 books. The pink ones are super sweet. The purple ones are a little steamier. They're like a Harlequin Presents. And they stopped after 6 and essentially said to Dark Horse, like, we don't need you anymore. We kind of have this, you know, distribution network that we do ourselves. So they've been doing them ever since. They're mostly digital now, but these 6 are kind of, I'm trying to make them a collector's item. They're not really a collector's item, but I think they're really interesting. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out there to collect sort of significant moments in romance and do it pretty cheaply. You know, I collected all 6 of these cost me like $30 with shipping. So not too bad. So yeah, so I'll write up more about this later, but that's kind of that, and you know, trying to make sure my 6-year-old gets to do her school every day kind of things. That's my life now.
Well, I'm just going to quickly make sure no more questions. Good, because we're out of time. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I just want to give a shout out to Michael and Esther and Henry. Thank you so much for commenting and for viewing. I can't comment on everyone who's viewing if you don't comment because I can't see your name. So thank you to everyone who's watching. And let me get back to my script. Thank you to the panelists for joining me. Thank you for staying in overtime with me. It's always hard to end these because you guys are so interesting and you keep talking. It's like, I don't want to stop them from talking, but they have to stop talking, especially Johnny, who's different time zone. Thank you so much. And just reminding everyone that you can order books from Mysterious Galaxy. I have that link in the description where you can just go directly and get the books. Books by the authors are also available to check out from the library with your library card. If you don't have one with us, you can sign up for an online resources library card. You don't have to live here or prove that you live anywhere. We'll just give you the online services card, and you can use Libby and Overdrive via Hoopla and Cloud Library. And if you're interested in more free online programs like this, check out our Facebook events and our event calendar on our website to see all that we have planned. Really quickly, I want to mention, because we talked a little bit about Star Wars, that our next pop culture panel series event is going to be May the 4th. And it's going to be a Star Wars panel. more information on that to come. So if you're a Star Wars fan, I hope you make some time on May the 4th, because I hope the Force is with you. The next author event is going to be Saturday, February 27th. It's going to be a romance author panel with Allison Temple, Louise Willingham, and Meryl Rubner. So I hope that you can make that. Thank you again for joining us. And oh, I almost forgot. I'm really trying hard not to forget this. I have a short 3-question survey. If you could please fill that out. I'm pasting it in the comments. Tell us how you liked it. Tell us if you found it. It helps us put on more free events like this, because we can prove that people liked it. So please fill that out. And thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.